Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing great. This is in Marvel I Am God. Were Endless transmigrated the timeline of Wolverine 3 and became the last mutant of the old era. At the moment, the X-Men have long since disbanded, Mutant is no longer brilliant, Wolverine is entering old age, and the entire race is in peril. Fortunately, he found that when he watched battles he could obtain the opponent's abilities. So let's start this story, relax and enjoy. In front of the gas station convenience store, Wanda and Pete, curled up in the corner, heard footsteps and looked in the direction from which the sound came, only to see a good-looking boy with good intentions walking towards them. "Do you need help?" Endless put his hands in his pockets, leaned forward and looked at Wanda softly, a warm smile on the corner of his mouth. Wanda looked up a little stunned, looking at this beautiful Eastern face. Her jewel-like clear eyes were slightly startled, and a trace of unconcealable warmth flowed in her heart. Having been in this country for so long, the girl heard such words from the rest of the population for the first time. In the past, no one wanted to pay attention to them sleeping on the streets, and even if they did, they were plotting against Wanda and did not have the slightest kindness to speak of. However, she did not completely let go of her guard because of simple concern. "If you need it, I can buy you something to eat." Endless smiled and continued. The brother Pete next to him was so hungry that his eyes lit up, and when he heard this, he directly let go of his guard, and said without the slightest hesitation, "Sir, you must have been sent by God to save us. My sister and I just need to buy something to eat." Afraid that he would repent, Pete pulled up the other party and turned around and walked inside. Seeing this, Wanda in the back was too late to hold his brother, and the other party was already about to walk to the convenience store. "Are you coming?" Endless looked back at the hesitating Wanda and asked. "Thank you." Wanda looked at her dumb-looking brother, took a deep breath, and decided to follow. After all, no one will have trouble with food, and she doesn't want to sleep on the streets hungry, and tomorrow there will be a cold corpse on the street. Moreover, she thought about it, if Endless really had any bad intentions, she will definitely not let the other party have a good time. Thinking, the girl secretly clenched her fists. Endless noticed her cute behavior and couldn't help but smile. In fact, he came to Wanda for another reason, that is, the other party may get Chaos Force in the future. It was powerful enough to affect the power of the multi-universe, and he naturally wanted it. 3 bowls of instant noodles. Endless ordered 3 bowls, and Wolverine stayed in the car to rest and did not come out. 3 bowls. "Sir, you are too young to pity these smugglers, they are simply parasites of the state." The short, stocky female cashier noticed the 2 figures following behind, her brows furrowed in disgust. "Hearsay." Wanda tugged at her hand with some fear, worried that Endless would dislike them. However, after she thought more, Endless just took out the cash and said coldly, "Do you sell it or not? Don't listen to good words." The female cashier rolled her eyes and turned to soak 3 bowls of instant noodles. Seeing this, Wanda had some good feelings for Endless. After all, she had been here for so long, and everyone else was cold-eyed. But Endless always had a warm smile on her face, which made her feel an indescribable feeling in her heart. The 3 of them sat down at the table by the window and served the noodles very quickly. The 2 brothers and sisters looked at the hot and fragrant noodles, swallowed and took a big bite to eat. The hot noodles were eaten, and the body that was chilled by the cold wind also got warmed instantly. Wanda took a small bite of noodles, looked up at the tall big brother opposite, her sapphire-like beautiful eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you." A show of hands. Endless looked at the girl in front of him, and the hatred in Scarlet Witch's heart during this period was far less intense than the back. She is just a weak girl, with a delicate face like a ceramic doll stained with a little mud, who came to the United States to seek revenge on Stark. What a naive idea, the other party is the head of the Stark group. Moreover, there is a misunderstanding in this. The girl opposite saw that he had been staring at herself, a little embarrassed, and then remembered something. She hurriedly opened the school bag she had removed, took out a book wrapped in a parchment scroll, and said softly, "Thank you, my name is Wanda, he is my brother Pete, this is a thank you gift." Between talks. Wanda's voice was a little weak, and her eyes flashed pitifully, for fear that Endless would dislike it. This is one of the few things on her that can be called a household possession. "My name is Endless." Endless took the gift, looked at the 16-year-old girl in front of him, adorable like a cat, and couldn't help but reach out and touch her head. Being made by a boy so intimate. Wanda's slender eyelashes couldn't bear to tremble, lowered her eyes, and didn't dare to look at Endless, her cheeks covered by sludge quickly stained with a layer of redness. Endless, who was sitting opposite, had a psychic ability, felt the girl's mood fluctuations at the moment, but did not expect to win favor so easily. The silly girl was fooled in a bowl of noodles. And Pete next to him is burying his head in eating noodles, not knowing that his sister is being housed by others. Click. Then the convenience store door was pushed open. Laura walked in and her gaze fell on Endless' hand rubbing Wanda's head, and her brows couldn't help but wrinkle slightly. Seeing this, Logan Hawlett, who followed behind, seemed to see his younger self, and a mocking smile was outlined at the corner of his mouth. "Endless, after driving for a day, you actually have energy." "Wolverine, I'm not as merry as you." Endless retracted his hand nonchalantly and shrugged. Sitting opposite, Wanda lowered her head and continued to sip and eat noodles. "With a full tank, we can go." Logan paid and urged. "Sir, where are you going?" Pete's eyes moved when he heard this, and he immediately swallowed the food in his mouth and asked. "We're going in the direction of Canada." Endless replied. Hearing this, Pete turned his head and exchanged glances with Wanda. Wanda pursed her lips and pleaded, "Endless, can you take us along the way? We'll get off in New York." "No problem." Endless agreed crisply. He knew that the two brothers and sisters would go to New York to seek revenge on Stark, but he did not expose it. Originally, Logan refused. They were being hunted down by the Akali Genetic Research Institute, and it was easy to implicate others, but seeing that Endless insisted on taking people, he didn't refute anymore. Anyway, two more people in the pickup truck just happened to sit down. The Pete Wanda brothers and sisters saw that there was a car to sit, and they were naturally very happy after walking for a few days, and Wanda, who seemed to be extremely guarded, easily removed his disguise after a short time and sat in the back seat of the big pickup truck together. It's just that Laura is a little sullen and incompatible, and the optimistic Wanda sibling atmosphere is incompatible. However, after Endless drove the pickup truck away, he did not know that a black SUV drove out behind the gas station. Sitting in the co-pilot was a burly man with muscles as knotted as the roots of an old tree. Pierce was sent to capture Endless' Crossbones Bullock. "Rumlow." Rumlow took out the walkie-talkie and made a low, hoarse voice. The people behind followed, and the target began to go far. "The voice is over." The vehicle's engine hummed and instantly accelerated in the direction in which Endless and his party left. Dense forest trails flanked by trees rustling against the wind. A large pickup truck, raw, whistled past, and 2 plumes of smoke fluttered behind the car between the rolling tires. Endless chose this more remote path for safety, and he survived in America for so many years, just in case of emergency, almost figured out the path between major cities. At the moment, the midday sun passes through the canopies on both sides, being divided into scattered spots of light that shine on the car body. Endless took the steering wheel, thinking about what to do next. The Wanda siblings and Laura in the last row were already asleep, and in the passenger seat Wolverine wore glasses and tinkered with her phone. Endless, I felt a familiar breath in you last night. At this time, Charles, who had been closing his eyes and falling asleep, opened his eyes to look at Endless's back. I accidentally discovered last night that I have the ability of the heart. Endless replied unsurprised. Are you sure you only have the ability of the mind? When Charles heard this, the smile under his eyes thickened. I knew I couldn't escape your eyes. Endless smiled helplessly, knowing that he would definitely escape telepathy, who was not a professor. After all, the other party has the smartest brain in the world, and it is only a matter of time before it is discovered. Don't worry, they are all asleep. Charles glanced at the sleeping Wanda siblings, both of whom fell into a deep sleep. Another variant of mine, ability, is able to replicate anyone's ability. Endless pondered for a while, knowing that it was difficult to hide it, so he simply chose to confess. Anyway, more and more abilities will be gained in the future, even if not to say that other people will notice this fact sooner or later. Instead of being suspicious of each other, it is better to say it yourself. Then he added, anyone's ability can be copied, not limited to mutant. So, you kid copied mine too. When Logan in the passenger seat heard this, he recalled Endless' self-healing ability earlier, and suddenly realized when he heard this. He originally thought that Endless himself had a super self-healing ability, mainly because similar situations had been reflected in other mutants. It's just not as perverted as Wolverine. It turned out that this kid copied his ability. I'm curious if your ability is to mimic temporary storage or to completely copy it as a part of yourself. Charles asked with interest when he heard this. Endless smiled and did not speak again. You bastard is really capable. Charles sensed Endless' mental fluctuations and scolded with a smile. Logan next to him also got the answer from the communication between the two, looking at Endless' pupils flickering. The other party brought him too many surprises. Airplanes. Yet at the moment, Endless' expression suddenly froze, a strong sense of crisis surged in, and the hand holding the steering wheel couldn't help but tighten, and his eyebrows revealed gloom. There are guests coming. Charles also sensed something different, and the smile on his face faded. Next second, the sound of a motorcycle roared from far and near, and in more than 10 seconds, several figures riding motorcycles appeared in the forest on both sides of the path, galloping among the trees to make the trees dance. Fuck, how did someone from the FBI find us? Logan caught a glimpse of the rider's uniform, recognized the logo as the FBI uniform, and couldn't help but curse in a low voice. Originally, the AKLIGMO Institute was annoying enough, and now there is actually another FBI. Endless, be careful ahead. Charles in the back seat reminded. Meanwhile, several jeeps appeared on the horizon of the road ahead, stopping there to completely block the entire road, and then several motorcycles roared and chased after them. For a time, the 4 sides of the front and rear were completely blocked. Seeing this, Endless had to slam on the brakes, and the big pickup truck left 4 forced parking tracks on the side road, and the body shook a few times before stopping. The violent shaking woke Laura and Wanda, siblings in the back seat, who looked up blankly. What happened? Pete saw the situation outside, and his eyes suddenly widened and looked around in panic. At the moment the pickup truck had just stopped. Hydra's camouflaged S.H.I.E.L.D. members surrounded their vehicles, staring at them warily with rifles in their hands. Dressed in a black uniform with his sleeves rolled up to reveal his muscular forearms, Crossbones Rumlow walked to the front of the car, took out his FBI documents and placed them in front of him. FBI, check the car. Shouldn't it be coming to get us? Pete saw the big man in the SWAT uniform, and was a little worried that he was coming at the two siblings. Logan Howlett and Endless are suspected of premeditated murder. Charles Xavier, classified as a weapon of mass destruction, caused a terrorist riot. Please get out of the car and cooperate with the investigation. If you disobey, we have the right to shoot you to death. Crossbones Rumlow's fierce gaze swept over several people. Finished talking. Dozens of Aegis Task Force members dressed in FBI costumes around them simultaneously raised their muzzles and aimed at the large pickup truck in front of them. It looks like we're already being targeted by S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. Endless looked indifferent. He recognized the identity of Crossbones, and was not too surprised. With their performance in the past few days, it was natural to be targeted by SHIELD, and Hydra hid it and waited for the opportunity. It's really a continuous succession. He sighed helplessly and opened the car door. Be careful, these guys are not good stubble. Seeing this, Logan also got out of the car. His eyes looked around, his gaze swept over the necks of the people around him, exuding a dangerous aura of a bloodthirsty lone wolf. Count you acquaintances. Crossbones Rumlow said this, but his heart did not relax in the slightest. After all, anyone on the other side is an extremely dangerous mutant, and the slightest slack will pay a terrible price for it. Put it on, don't let me do it myself. Thereupon, Rumlow put a few collars in front of the two, which are collars that can inhibit the mutant ability, and the X gene will be useless after wearing it. Any mutant will be like a normal person. You don't seem to be figuring out the situation. Endless sneered, and his slender fingers tapped his temples. For a while, an intangible energy fluctuation instantly spread out towards the surroundings. What are you going to do? Put your hands down. Crossbones Rumlow noticed Endless' movements. His face suddenly solemnized as if he was facing a great enemy, and then raised his gun to shoot. Yet the next second, his face turned pale instantly, because he found that his body was completely out of control. Even the facial features on his face could not be controlled, and his expression slowly became dull. But his consciousness is completely awake. It's not just him. All the members of the contingent who came with him at the moment stayed frozen in place, as if they were instantly frozen like stone statues. Charles in the pickup truck saw this scene, felt the spiritual fluctuations in the air, his eyes flickered, and he couldn't help muttering, "Endless, it's really amazing." The professor did not expect that the other party had mastered the use of the mind ability in only one day, and this guy simply did not need any adaptation period. That's right. The people around him are controlled by Endless' mind ability, and although he uses the ability of mind control is not as pure as Charles, he can still control dozens of people at once. Swish. Logan Horrit next to him saw that the person on the other side was controlled, and did not hesitation, and his hands stabbed out wolf claws between his fingers. Transform into a swift and bloodthirsty wolf and slaughter the Crossbones men. The sudden burst of power in his aging body resembles a heavy truck, wielding the sharp claws of the adamantium structure, and throwing his hands at everyone to easily penetrate the enemy's head. Crossbones Rumlow stood in place, watching his men fall one after another, but he could only wait and do nothing. "Damn!" he roared in his consciousness. However, to no avail. Ordinary people's consciousness is no match for Endless. After all, the other party can easily resolve even the professor. Next. In tens of seconds, all the members of the contingent fell to the ground, scarlet blood flowed from the broken head, and soon the ground was soaked with blood. "It's your turn." Logan's gloomy eyes carried the wolf's paws dyed red and walked up to Crossbones. "Nope. No. Nope." Crossbones Rumlow was hoarse in his consciousness. He regretted underestimating the enemy's strength, but in the next second, the cold steel claws wrapped in hot blood and fiercely penetrated his brain. Then the last sound of consciousness completely disappeared in this world. Poof. Logan pulls the wolf's paw out of Crossbones' skull, his eyes indifferent as the latter's corpse falls and gradually loses its temperature. It took less than a minute. The elite contingent brought by Crossbones Rumlow was completely destroyed without being able to resist. The cement-paved road was already stained red by the blood flowing from the skull, and the air was filled with a hot and strong smell of blood. Endless swept the scene in front of him and lowered his hand expressionlessly. Inside a pickup truck. Pete looked at the corpses all over the ground outside the car, and his immature face had already become extremely pale. He didn't expect that the big brother with a warm smile on his face was actually a murderous maniac, and there were so many corpses lying on the ground for a long time. Pete panicked internally, curled up in his chair and shivering, thinking about escape. After Wanda next to him saw Endless' ability, a glimmer of expectation flashed under his eyes, and his eyes flickered with his small hand, not knowing what he was thinking. Endless' face outside the car was unusually gloomy, and he knew that being targeted by Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. was not a good thing. It means that in the following days, for a long time, they will most likely not be very peaceful. Logan returned to the pickup truck and saw Endless looking at the corpse in fascination, and immediately understood that these guys were definitely not FBI people, otherwise the latter would not have paid so much attention. After all these years, if the FBI can really catch them, it's long overdue. "Endless, let's get out of here quickly," Logan said. "Let's go." Endless came to his senses, took a deep breath, and turned back to the car. Now the only thing they can do is to cover the water, but he is not worried about the threat of SHIELD. It's just that dissatisfaction will be disturbed in the future. Thinking of it, Endless started the car again, and the bodies that ran over the ground drove in the direction of New York City. Shortly after they left, several more black SUVs arrived. A figure stepped down from the passenger seat, his brows furrowed and his face solemn. This person was Phil Coulson, the famous good man of SHIELD. At the moment he looked at the corpses all over the ground, and his eyebrows revealed an incompatious gloom. The technicians accompanying him have quickly begun to work, using various instruments to check for any traces that may be left in his surroundings. Soon, someone came to report to Phil Coulson. "Sir, there have been fluctuations in the magnetic field around here, and it looks like someone has used the psychic ability." Phil Coulson listened to the report, leaned over and unwrapped open the clothes of a corpse and found proof of work from SHIELD, his brow furrowed deeper. "Stop the mission first, close the team." He set his sights on Crossbones Rumlow's corpse, and through the technology just now, he detected magnetic field fluctuations, and it seemed that Rumlow and Endless had met each other. Phil Coulson also wondered why the other party would come on this mission. After thinking, he dialed Nick Fury's call. "Boss, Rumlow is in front of me and has been in contact with the subject." The dozens of contingents he brought with him, including himself, were completely annihilated. On the other end of the phone, Nick Fury was silent for a moment, then said, "It seems that the strength of that yellow-skinned boy is beyond our imagination. You guys come back first, I need to be prepared." After a pause, he added, "Rumlow's thing, come back and talk about it." Time passes. Soon it was approaching evening, and the remnants of the sun were like blood and the clouds were churning. The sun gradually intersects with distant mountains. Endless drove the pickup truck through the dense woods, the bright red afterglow spilled on his face, and the outline of New York City finally gradually appeared in everyone's field of vision. Looking under the firmament, the buildings are lined up, outlining a staggered stretch of lines. At the end of the horizon is a huge amount of silhouette. A city considered the heart of the country, right in sight. Endless, who was in the driver's seat, sat up slightly and looked complicated, knowing what might happen in the future. He knew New York was in the Marvel Universe. It is a special place where almost half of all the big events take place. At the moment it's getting closer to New York City. Logan Howlett in the passenger seat looked at the silhouette of the sky, gradually becoming clearer, and his face that reflected the afterglow of the residual sun showed strange emotions. For both Wolverine and Charles, New York City is also a special presence. They used to be in the city, and they used to have an academy, which was equivalent to their home. Only now it's all gone. Logan's pupils trembled slightly, and he was silent for a moment. Endless, let's stop here. It is easy to be discovered by others when entering the city. Wolverine, we're already being targeted now, so we're still going into town, and no one wants to be rats in the sewers. Endless just continued to drive forward, without the slightest intention of slowing down. In fact, since he came to the Marvel Universe to become a mutant, he already had an idea in his heart. After all, he can't always be tired of running. After all, it is not a long-term solution, and he prefers to live a peaceful life. Logan fell silent when he heard this, and slowly spoke for a long time. This is fate. In the past, he did not choose to fight, but the reality is so cruel, step by step to push the situation to what it is now. Logan, your fate has never been a lifetime of bloody battles, but in the end you will die alone at sea. Endless turned his head slightly and said seriously, anyone can hope for everything they want. As long as it's not the end of the world, then tomorrow everything will continue. At this moment, the sunset in the distance has been half submerged below the horizon, and the golden sunset sun is softly spreading through the window into the car. Charles, who was in the back seat, fell silent when he heard the teenager's words. He had fantasized countless times that he could do everything he could so that the children could sleep peacefully, on the soft grass, staring at the starry sky, dreaming of the future, so that they could hold the stars in their hands. This one reason has put him in charge for decades. He had spent his whole life giving all mutant a home, only now everything was gone. Now hear Endless' remarks. Charles' cloudy eyes flickered slightly, and the elderly body was once again ignited. Endless, I support your idea. Mutant was not born to endure scorn, we should also have our hope. He spoke out in support of Endless' idea. On weekdays, Laura, who showed no interest in many things, also nodded solemnly with a small face at this time. Pete nodded as well. he was now full of fear for Endless and wanted to leave quickly. As for Wanda, he stared blankly at Endless, bathed in the sunset sun. At the moment, she felt that the latter exuded some kind of inexplicable charm. Logan on the co-pilot, however, felt that everything was very absurd, and was silent for a long time, only saying this sentence, "You will regret it." "Logan, you made the right choice." Endless smiled when he heard this and stepped on the accelerator. The big pickup, driven by him, drove faster toward New York City. And at the moment, based on the idea of a peaceful life, he came up with a new idea to build a new country. Only war can bring peace to races. It didn't take long for Endless and his party to arrive in New York City, which is full of high-rise buildings, and stayed in a hotel in the Yellow area, close to Hell's Kit Endless. Using fake ID information, Wolverine rented 2 apartments for several people, including one for the Wanda Pitt siblings. As for the remaining set, it was reserved for Endless and others, and Wolverine did this for safety reasons. After all, there was a previous experience of the X-24. As the night darkened, everyone went to sleep, except for Endless' room, which was still lit. He stands high in front of floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the night view of New York City at night, illuminated by the high-rise buildings and crisscrossing streets. Endless still had things to do, not to travel to DC Gotham, but to another matter. "If I want to stay in the DC universe for a few more days later, I must arrange things on this side of the Marvel universe," he thought silently. The main problem dealt with by the Marvel Universe is that the group has no stable place to stay and needs to run non-stop. There is not much time left for Endless to travel to the DC Universe every time, and it can't last forever, and each time he can only travel to the DC Universe for a short time, and the restrictions are too big to do too much. Moreover, since he had already planned to establish a kingdom that belonged to Mutant, then you have to pick the first puzzle piece. Avengers hadn't been founded, the S.H.I.E.L.D. organization was in chaos again, and now was his perfect time. Thinking, Endless' gaze fell in the dim direction of Hell's Kit Endless in the distance. New York City that never sleeps is far less glamorous than it seems, and Hell's Kit Endless, which is closer to the city center, is known for its slums and breeding many criminals or gangsters. In the darkness of the night, Endless walked among the dimly lit streets of Hell's Kit Endless. Dirty, cold, forced. The unconcealed stench of corruption and incessant cursing, the ubiquitous homeless man sleeping on the floor, nestled in a dilapidated tent roar shook the sky. The brighter the city, the more unsightly it hides in its shadows. Endless walked, feeling the huge amounts of class gap in the city, and sighed in his heart that the city was not inferior to Gotham. It's just that New York City is obviously not rich in madmen, but definitely rich in manic gangsters. Just when he was about to walk around a corner, Endless noticed that his hostile eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze froze, and his fist was withdrawn from his pocket. Swish! Sure enough, the next second, several black shadows suddenly rushed towards him, but he reacted extremely quickly and threw his fists, and dull collisions sounded one after another. Several people suddenly fell to the ground and curled up on the ground and groaned. "Why do you do it to me?" Endless grimaced. The crime rate in this city can be described as no less than Gotham, and he only went so far to catch 3. Moreover, if you change to someone else just now, the sneak attack will be enough to sleep for one night. We want to borrow some gambling money from you." The wandering man clutching his abdomen was covered in sweat, and replied intermittently with the pain. He looked at the yellow-skinned boy in front of him who looked clearly not strong, and even had some slender arms, and his eyes were full of shock. Just now, he had the illusion of being hit hard by a mud truck, and even his whole body was torn when he spoke. What a bunch of scum! A cold light flashed under Endless' eyes and said coldly, "Please raise your noble hand and let us go." Several homeless men fell to the ground and opened their mouths to beg for mercy. "Do you know Kim?" Endless glanced at them and asked. "His purpose tonight is to come to the underground Emperor Jinjeng and make Hell's Kit Endless the first puzzle piece of the Empire. After all, Jin's gangster can be said to cover the sky in New York and even most of the North." Command. When the homeless man heard the familiar name, he shook unconsciously, and seemed to hear the demon crawling out of hell. He often hangs out of the Hell's Kit Endless warehouse, where Kim goes out every night. The homeless man took a deep breath and said tremblingly, "Good." Endless got an answer before letting go of the homeless man. "Everyone knows where Kim is, including the New York City Police." He looked at Endless back after turning around and reminded him. The meaning of the phrase tramp is obvious. As the underground emperor, Jinjeng is an extremely dangerous guy. Endless ignored him much and left. Everyone in New York City knows where this big collective is hiding, but they think they are at the top of the food chain, and even the police dare not provoke them. They even have a lot of important dirt in their hands, which they are able to sell to government personnel and celebrities. Underground trading. Even arms smuggling. There is nothing they dare not do, because no one will restrain them, and even if there is, it is only symbolic. This is Hell's Kit Endless. At the moment, the sky is gradually approaching late at night. Night hangs over the city. Meanwhile, in a warehouse in Hell's Kit Endless, a group of workers are busy carrying goods. Their steps are rushing and hot, but no one knows that danger is quietly coming. "You stupid pigs, move faster for me. If you delay Jin's business, everyone will not be able to eat and go." Josh, the bald man next to him, had a cold gaze, his eyes scanning back and forth impatiently. "Bush, I'll worry that Daredevil will come over." The muscular Max came over, his eyebrows showing concern. Previously, Daredevil would always interfere with Jin's business from time to time, causing the latter a lot of losses. Those in power suffer losses, and the pressure will naturally spread anger on his subordinates. "Don't worry, that damned blind man was crippled by a bullseye yesterday, and whether you can get up today is one thing. If he really dares to come again, it is to find death. No one dares to interfere with tonight's business." When Bush heard his companion say this, he raised his eyebrows and sneered coldly. "Since you said so, I am relieved." Max, who had been worried, heard that the annoying Daredevil was actually disabled, and suddenly felt a stone fall in his heart. Yet at this very moment. "Damn! Stop him, don't let him in." "Ha! My hand!" There was a heart-rending scream from outside the warehouse, and even just listening to the sound, you could feel that something extremely terrifying had happened to them. Josh, the bald man who was still light just now, and his companion Max changed their faces greatly when they heard the voice, and they looked at each other, and their pupils vibrated continuously. Daredevil is here again. Just when the two were in doubt, several of his subordinates who had fled in a hurry ran towards the warehouse, each of their faces white and bloodless, and their expressions were terrified to the extreme. "Monster! Monster!" Some people even couldn't hold the gun in their hands steadily, screaming loudly and not looking back to run for their lives. "Looked at." Both Josh and Max frowned. Daredevil came to disrupt their business, not just a day or two, but no matter which time. These subordinates have never reacted so badly. What's going on? Their reaction is too exaggerated, right? The two frowned with doubts in their hearts, and at the same time tacitly pulled out their guns. At this time, they saw behind those Kanghuang's fleeing subordinates, and a strange figure slowly walked in. I saw that the man's body was covered with bullet holes, and his clothes were red with blood, but he was unmoved by his injuries, and his steps were steady towards the warehouse. Stop! Do you know where this is? This is Jin's territory. When Josh and Max saw this scene, their faces changed drastically, their pupils shrank, and they raised their guns in panic to threaten. Where is Kim? That figure was none other than Endless. He looked at the two people holding guns at him in front of him with cold eyes, and asked coldly. While speaking, Endless' footsteps did not stop, and he walked straight towards the other party. Stop! I'll shoot again. Josh aimed his gun at the center of Endless' eyebrows and threatened angrily. However, Endless on the opposite side was not moved at all, and even quickened his pace. Fuck! Josh scolded angrily and decisively pulled the trigger. The pitch-black muzzle flickered with fire, and a burst of gunfire rang out through the warehouse, and bullets spun out. Bang! Gunshots rang out in the old and bright warehouse, and the bullets carried huge destructive force through Endless' skull, leaving a hideous blood hole in the center of his eyebrows. The flesh and blood at the wound were charred black by the high temperature of the bullet. But Josh didn't see the slightest joy on his face. Because the boy standing on the opposite side who was pierced through the skull was not affected in the slightest, the wound was visible to the naked eye to heal rapidly, and the bullet fell out of his forehead. The steps towards them did not fluctuate except for a pause when they had just been shot. Fuck! Fuck! Josh and Max instantly lost all blood on their faces, and stood frozen in place, their eyes full of horror. They looked at Endless, as if they saw Satan crawling out of hell. His blood seemed to be counterflowing, and his body was quickly cold. How could the two not understand at this time that the young man in front of them was not a human being, nor was he a rival existence for them? The haze of death blinked and occupied their minds, leaving them speechless or able to make any moves. Then, a barrage of bullets recalled. When Josh and Max looked back, their bodies shook, and they almost flew away in fright. Endless had already discharged all the bullets in his body, all the wounds on his body were healing, and he walked not far from them. Tell me, where is Kim? He looked at the other two with indifferent eyes, and spoke in a calm tone. Josh opened his mouth just to say something. However, in the blink of an eye, countless unknown gang members surrounded from all directions like a black tide. With the muzzle of the black light circulating in his hand, he aimed his brush at Endless. Shoot me. Shoot hard. Beat this monster into a sieve for me. Beat. Seeing that his men were ready, Josh seemed to have grabbed the last straw, his face twisted and he spoke eagerly, and even his voice was hoarse. However, in the next second, Endless' fingertips had lightly tapped his temples. Invisible psychic fluctuations spread. Josh's voice fell, but there was no expected dense gunfire, and the entire warehouse fell into an eerie silence. He and Max looked around, and all the gangster men had already collected their guns, and stood in place in a daze. Endless uses Charles's usual technique to build a mental cage. But the professor is used for mutant personalities who don't want to hurt but constantly hurt other people. Endless, on the other hand, directly locked all the thinking of these gangster scum and plunged them into a brief sluggishness. Then, Endless cast his calm gaze on Josh. What the hell are you? What the hell is the monster? Josh and Max looked at the situation around them, and then noticed that the boy opposite began to approach again, and retreated in horror. Where is the address of the Jinn base? Endless ignored the other party's question and asked in an icy tone. In fact, as the Underground Emperor, few people know his true identity, let alone the address of his base. After all, there are too many enemies of Jinn. Josh and Max heard a little hesitation, their eyes flickered, as if they were thinking about which of the more tragic endings would be more tragic if they fell into the hands of the boy in front of them, and betrayed the gold and were caught. If you don't cherish the opportunity, then let's stop here. Endless was too lazy to do more nonsense with these two, reached out and pointed at the center of their eyebrows, directly using the mind invasion. He broke into each other's consciousness and retrieved all the memories of the two. Then, after slightly comparing the memories of Josh and Max, Endless finally got Kim and the exact base address. As for the two who were invaded by the heart, they felt like their brains had been drilled back and forth several times, and they were lying on the ground pale and painful. Sorry, we were wrong, let us go. Josh and Max have completely broken their guts, and there is only endless fear in Endless' heart, and their mouths are whispering for mercy. It's just a pity that there is only one chance. Next second, when they raised their heads, they saw Endless' palms slowly covering their eyes, and they spoke softly as if to comfort a baby. Psychic invasion hurts, right? It's okay, it won't hurt next. Boom. Boom. Then two skull-bursting sounds sounded. Endless crushed the sticky blood of the two people's skulls, and the two headless corpses fell one after another. Scarlet blood flowed in an instant, spreading across the old ground of the warehouse. Then Endless had already got the answer, and turned away without stopping. There were still many gang members at the scene who were not killed, but he had more urgent things to do, and they could only be regarded as getting away with it. Minutes passed. Those gang members who were confined to their minds and fell into sluggishness by Endless' mental cage began to regain control of their bodies. Josh and Max are dead. You have to report to the boss quickly. The gang members, who had partially regained their senses, looked blankly at the miserable bodies of Josh and Max, and quickly came to their senses. Immediately gave Kim and called. With that, a high-tech building with a top-floor office. Jingle bell. The phone rings. Jin squinted slightly in a white suit, and his large, round body leaned back in a chair to rest, and he answered the phone impatiently because he was disturbed by the ringing. Say. Kim spat out a word angrily, annoyed at being disturbed. After a few seconds, he hung up the phone, his face even more angry. Fuck. Someone dares to provoke me. Jin roared and smashed the desk in front of him with a punch. His body is round, but under the wrapping of the suit, it is full of exaggerated muscles with great strength. So much so that the men outside the door could hear the movement inside. I don't know what it is that makes my boss so rage. And not long after Jin hung up the phone, he received another message from the guard. Boss, someone has invaded the base building. The guard's voice trembled, with a bit of fear. What? Jin, his face was solemn, and the computer monitor in front of him appeared, and many different areas of surveillance screens. Contains all corners of the building. Jin frowned and clicked on one of them. I saw a yellow-skinned boy, who actually walked towards it openly, and the corpses were like mountains everywhere he went. Hell's Kit Endless. Kim and headquarters in front of the base building. Endless shook off the broken flesh and blood stains on his hands, Perhaps he had survived in such a world for too long. He had long been numb to the matter of killing, even if his hands were now stained with sticky blood. He walked expressionlessly to the depths of the building with the blood stains of corpses on the ground. Stop! Not taking 2 steps, another fierce gang member with a gun blocked in front of him. With a casual wave of his hand, Endless exerted his psychic ability to instantly control the other party in place. Under the frightened gaze of the gang member who froze in place, Endless' slender fingers easily rested on his neck. With 5 fingers tightened, pinching the neck of a gang member was as easy as pinching a rotten dead wood, and the cervical spine, trachea, and muscles were all twisted into a paste under the huge force. Boom! The gang member who stood in the way fell, and the body fell apart. It's a pity for a loyal subordinate. Endless looked at the corpse at his feet and admired Jinjeng a little. What a powerful skill to make any of his subordinates willingly work for him. Thinking, he continued to walk towards the building, slaughtering a few guys who were in the way, and easily walked into the hall of the Jinh building. At the moment, the hall was empty. Endless looked around calmly, as if he was not in the enemy camp, but as if he was at home. Boom! Then, the doors on 3 sides of the hall slammed shut and locked, leaving only the door facing Endless open. Then a neat footstep came from the open gate, and a team of guards in white uniforms ran out with weapons in hand, lined up on either side of the doorway. It's like greeting the arrival of a big shot. Endless' sighs calmly fell on the center of the gate, and he had far beyond the 5 senses of ordinary people, and he had already sensed that the person he was looking for had arrived. Sure enough. A few seconds later, a tall, mighty and terrifyingly oppressive figure walked out of it, and the sound of each step landing was extremely heavy, and the tower-like body was slowly enveloped by the huge shadow cast by the light. The person who came is the underground Emperor Jinhe. He glared at Endless, extremely annoyed at the uninvited guest who broke into the base. In this New York City, it belongs to the government by day, to the gangster at night, and belongs to his underground Emperor Jinhe. Endless' move was undoubtedly to roast him on the fire, which Kim could not bear. You are Kaimyo. Endless looked Jinhe, who was tall in a suit and leather shoes, and said lightly. Some people say that this big man with a round body like a ball, the body fat rate is actually only 2%, and the muscle strength of the whole body is close to the peak of human beings. Kim doesn't have any super ability, but he trains professionally every day, against a group of top martial arts masters from around the world. Each time it was 1 against 10, but every training session could not exceed 20 seconds, and the opponent in training was either dead or injured. As a human being, the individual combat power is second only to Captain America. Boy, you've messed with the wrong person, Jin said angrily. Then he asked, who instructed you to do this? In his memory, he had never had an enemy like Endless, who most likely ordered him to raid him. No one directed. Endless' expression was indifferent, and Raw didn't mess with half a minute. I'm here today to give you 2 choices, either surrender. Saying this, he paused, tilted his head to look at Jinhe, and the corners of his mouth hooked up a cruel smile. Or die. Who do you think you're talking to? When Jin on the other side heard this, his brows immediately turned up, and his face was bruised and angry. Find death. The men around him were equally angry, and suddenly raised their guns. These people have been working for Jin for so many years, and they have never seen a guy who dares to be so arrogant here. The bullseye, who had been hidden in the dark for a long time, looked gloomy, took out the steel ball and rolled nimbly between his 5 fingers, watching this scene ready to wait for the master's order. But I'm curious, why do you dare to make me submit? At this time, Jinjin, who roared angrily, suddenly changed his tone, suppressed his throat, and looked at Endless with bloodthirsty sneering. Just because you can break into the building, it's not enough. Feeling Jinhee's transformation, the surrounding subordinates suddenly became nervous, and the suppressed anger erupted even more terrifying than the outward anger. You don't have a choice. Endless said indifferently. Jin on the other side still wanted to say something, but suddenly his eyes inexplicably began to sour, rubbing his eyes and finding that the surrounding environment had changed drastically. He came to a hospital. Yellowed ceilings, icy white lights, the pungent smell of disinfectant water. Kim also recognized the hospital as the same hospital that treated his wife and children. A few years ago, his wife and children were killed by his nemesis, and since then Kim has been left alone and without a family. It was also from then on that Jin began to rise by any means, and eventually became the only emperor of the underground world of New York City. It's just that he is back in this place that makes him sad again. Jin inexplicably felt that his heart, which had been indifferent to everything, suddenly wavered. He staggered along the memory to a door and saw his wife and children lying breathless on the hospital bed inside. Vanessa. Richard. Kim and Raw shouted the names of his wife and children, collapsed and fell to his knees on the side of the bed. His eyes were red, and huge amounts of grief swallowed him up like a big wave. Humph, Jin Lian, you are too embarrassed to even protect your family. In the future, you still obediently clamp your tail and stop being my opponent. You are not worthy. When he looked up again, he saw that the man lying on the hospital bed had become his enemy, Hill Vyman, who was laughing evilly and mocking himself. Next second. The real world. Damn it. Jin didn't actually go anywhere, just stood in place and closed his eyes, only to suddenly open his eyes a few seconds later and come back to his senses in fear. The bullseye in the dark saw that the master's expression changed, mistakenly thought that the latter was hurt, and immediately held the steel ball and prepared to strike. Don't move. But Jin suddenly stopped him. Then Jinji put his eyes on Endless again. His eyes were strange, and he began to realize the strength of the latter. What can you bring me? Jinji's eyelids moved, and he questioned after the picture just now. Your family. Endless spoke indifferently. My family. Jin Tian's expression was touched when he heard Endless' words, and fell into silence, and the picture he saw in the psychic illusion just now in his mind was vividly remembered. After Endless has a psychic ability, even if he does not deliberately use the psychic ability, he can detect the other party's emotional changes. He knew that the underground emperor in front of him, at the moment, he must be deeply trapped in the grief of the death of his family. After all, the emotions squeezed in his heart for many years. Being awakened again means that anyone can be affected. Even if it is the underground emperor Jin Yuan. What's more, Kim doesn't care about his family. Thinking. Endless once again quietly drove the mind to fluctuate, constantly provoking every nerve of the other party, making the latter subtly submit. This is Charles' usual method. As long as he knows the professor in the past, he will be careful when meeting each other, and he will be invaded by the mind of this sophisticated guy. Such tactics are most effective when people are most vulnerable. This is also the reason why Endless previously let Jinhee fall into the illusion of the tragic death of his wife and children, and he had to tear some cracks in the other party's thinking before he could do what came after. In fact, he didn't expect to be able to make Jin obediently submit by violence from the beginning. After all, if people surrender to the Underground Emperor because of this, it is difficult to guarantee that they will not have two hearts in the future. It is still necessary to fundamentally change the thinking of the other party and make them willing to serve themselves from the bottom of their hearts. I think your proposal is fine, but I am not surrendering, but working with you. Jin took a deep breath and looked at Endless with a twinkle in his eyes, unaware that his hostility towards the latter had been completely removed. At the same time, there is a strong trust in my heart. He recalled the ability that Endless had shown along the way, and felt that as long as he tried his best to cooperate with the other party, he would definitely be able to change back to his family. However, he did not know that in fact, the so-called cooperation was called. The moment he spoke, he was already completely surrendered to the teenager in front of him. As you like, happy cooperation. Endless smiled when he heard this. He just took advantage of Jin and fell into the gap of thinking and wavering, and used the ability of the mind to split the latter's personality in two. And locked up with a mental cage in it, a personality full of hostility and suspicion towards himself. After that, unless Endless takes the initiative to unlock the spiritual cage, Kim will have unreserved trust in him. The bullseye hidden in the shadows next to him always felt that something was wrong, but seeing that his boss agreed to Endless's request, he stopped talking. After all, he serves Jin and gives remuneration, not Jin and this person, as long as it does not affect him to take money. After a partnership, Jin also took Endless to the top floor office. Say, what do you need me to do for you? Kim asked as he sat in his seat. At present, I need you to pay more attention to the people of S.H.I.E.L.D for me, and notify me as soon as there is any abnormal behavior. And send people to pick up some people at the Canadian border. Endless said slowly, handing Jin an address and a list at the same time. The person in his mouth is none other than Laura's experimental body friends, who also escaped from the AKLIGMO Institute, the New Mutant. These young New Mutants also have a big role and can form part of Endless' future mutant country. So Endless thought about taking them all in. Two very simple things. But I'm looking forward to challenging things more. Jin looked at the address and list stall and said that there was no problem. As he spoke, he didn't even realize that he was in Endless' shoes and thinking about the latter. There will be later. Endless smiled when he heard this, and after explaining what Jin had done, he did not stop too much and returned to the hotel. It was late at night when Endless returned to the hotel, more than an hour after he left the house, but only a little more than an hour. Actually let the Underground Emperor Jin give in, so that this guy who controls most of the underworld in the north of America is willing to do anything for him. If this matter is spread out, it will definitely make the entire underworld of America tremble. Knock knock. Endless had just returned to his room to take a shower, and not long after lying down, the glass window was knocked. Laura. How are you standing here? He looked up and saw Laura's petite figure standing outside. Is there something to find me? Why don't you come in through the main entrance? Endless hurriedly got up and opened the window, watching the other party quickly turn over from the windowsill and enter the room, full of doubts, and asked for the little girl's late-night visit. He didn't have any unusual associations. After all, the other party was only 14 years old, how could he have other thoughts? Laura remained silent and did not answer, but pointed to her nose to indicate that she smelled blood. A pair of big eyes stared at Endless with question marks. I just went out to do something. Endless didn't explain much, just said so briefly. Laura frowned as she listened to the other party's tone of fooling herself like a child, but did not do too much entanglement. Reaching out and taking out the comics of the X-Men in his bag, he turned the pages and handed it to Endless, looking at him sincerely. "Want to read the story?" Endless took the comic and seemed to understand the other party's meaning a little. Laura nodded with a slight smile on her face when she heard this. Then, knock knock. There was another knock on the glass window. Endless heard the reputation. "Endless, did you sleep?" Then I saw a timid figure standing outside the window. "It's Wanda." At this moment, she has cleaned herself up cleanly and refreshed. The face is no longer covered with sludge, and the whole porcelain doll-like delicate face exudes its due beauty. A pair of sapphire-like clear eyes seemed to contain these slight uneasiness and expectation because of the late-night disturbances, and the white face was also slightly stained with a layer of redness. See Endless' gaze projected. The fingers of Wanda's hands behind her back are tightly twisted together, revealing her body wrapped in pajamas, curvy and thrilling, exuding a sense of maturity that is completely different from her young face. If the whole person ignores the face, it looks completely like a ripe peach, and you can imagine the scene of juice overflowing with just a light bite. With such a figure, coupled with a pure face that still has a youthful atmosphere, two words suddenly appeared in Endless' mind: pure desire. Definitely. Seeing that Wanda also chose to visit from the window at this moment, Endless was more puzzled in his heart. Why doesn't everyone like to walk through the door? And what did Wanda come to herself for at night? Also listening to stories. The night is as thick as ink, and the sky is high without moon or star. The S.H.I.E.L.D. Triboloid building is still brightly lit. Inside the director's office. These mutants will never be worrying. Nick Fury had just finished his call with the congressman, leaning back in his seat and pinching his eyebrows and murmuring in distress. "I thought that the government would issue a drug to food to suppress the mutant gene, and this race would soon disappear from the world. As a result, I didn't expect that a few remnant parties would still bring them such a big threat." Meantime, Nick Fury is also thankful that the government made the right decision. Otherwise, Mutant will grow up in the future, and the consequences will definitely be unimaginable. Then, the door to the office was pushed open. "Boss, someone saw Endless' group driving into downtown New York." Phil Coulson walked in and handed over a document with a solemn expression. Before Nick. After Fury asked him back, he had to put it aside for the time being because the task was too risky. But Phil Coulson is still paying attention to Endless-related matters, and now that he has found their clues and traces, he chose to report it as soon as possible. Nick. Hearing this, Fury sat up straight and took the document with a serious expression, his brows furrowed deeper and deeper. "They actually entered the city, aren't they afraid of being discovered?" He looked at the record on the document about the arrival of Endless and his party in the city center, his eyes flickered, and his mood became heavier. Not only is downtown New York crowded with people, but there are a lot of important people staying there. If Endless and these mutants are determined to make trouble and do something extreme, I am afraid that it will have an impact on the entire country and even the world pattern. Such a thing has not happened before, and the aftermath took a long time and the heavy cost to subside. The same thing can't happen again, and these uneasy elements must be disposed of as soon as possible. Nick. Fury thought of Endless' terrifyingly exaggerated variant ability, and immediately made a decision. Endless and Charles, two people with psychic abilities at the same time, in his eyes, have completely become a time bomb with terrifying destructive power, which may explode at any time and bring misery to the world. Especially their location at the moment is still equivalent to the city center in the heart of the city, which is not to be taken lightly. But to exercise control, it is not so simple. Before you are sure of their motives, if you rashly organize people to arrest them with great fanfare, you must not backfire and provoke them. Boss, someone found Jin's Hell's Kit Endless, and the warehouse in the north was washed in blood, with heavy casualties. At this time, Phil Coulson also knew the seriousness of the matter and continued, according to the situation on the scene, it is very likely that Endless did it. It's just that we haven't found enough evidence yet. Phil Coulson looked solemn, because the cameras in many parts of Hell's Kit Endless were in a state of disrepair, and there was no way to get the video footage from the time. After all, gangsters don't leave any handle for themselves. Nick Fury narrowed his eyes when he heard this, and he couldn't figure out what Endless's motive was. Okay, I see. He thought carefully and asked Phil Coulson to go down first, then dialed a phone. Natasha Romanov, come and see me. Nick. Fury said to the other end of the phone in a serious tone. Soon. Black Widow Natasha Romanov, wearing a black tights that outlined her hot figure to the fullest, walked in. Head, you want me to deal with Tony again? What about Stark? She walked with the wind, her burgundy short hair fluttered with her steps, and her eyes were as bright as amber, looking at Nick. Fury. Every move of this woman exudes a variety of charms all the time, seducing people's hearts. Don't worry about him for the time being, I'll deal with it later. Nick. Fury looked at the other party, his tight frown did not stretch from beginning to end, took out a piece of information and handed it over. Now you need to contact this person, he is extremely dangerous, you must be careful. Black Widow took the information and opened it, looking at Endless's beautiful face in the file, and her sexy red lips outlined a good-looking smile. No problem. Meanwhile, in a hotel near Hell's Kit Endless. Endless was unaware of what had happened to Shield, holding a comic book and whispering bedtime stories to the two girls in bed. Raw. It wasn't long before Laura and Wanda fell into a deep sleep, making a slight and even raw sucking sound. Although they are not together, they have experienced days of rushing, and they have not slept so peacefully for a long time. Sure enough, they are still little girls, and they will listen to bedtime stories. Endless leaned on the bed and looked at the two people sleeping peacefully on the left and right, put down the comic book in his hand and breathed a sigh of relief. Then, as the afterglow swept over Wanda, he inadvertently caught a glimpse of the snow white of a deep ravine. It's really a crime to look at, it's not at all what this young segment should be. What was I thinking? Endless quickly withdrew his gaze when he sighed. After all, the current Wanda is only a 16 or 17-year-old girl, he really can't do it. With a lot of thoughts, he got out of bed, stood up and walked to the bathroom. He's going to take a cool shower. It's early morning. The sky has just turned a touch of fish belly, and the cloudless New York City has just experienced the story of a night, and it is about to wake up again before it sleeps. In the hotel near Hell's Kit Endless and his party got up one after another and came to the lobby to gather. Logan Howlett went to the front desk to check out, collected the fake ID, and walked out the door. Endless, where should we go next? On walking to the door of the hotel, Wolverine turned to look at Endless and asked, after all, it was his idea to enter the city. We don't have to think about going to the Canadian border next, I'll have someone bring Laura's friend over. Endless thought about it, and then slowly spoke, let's stay in New York, anyway, This city is so big, isn't there a place for us to live? What do you say? Are you really going to put down roots in New York City? Logan was stunned when he got such an answer. He frowned and stared at Endless, and found that the latter was not like a joke, and suddenly a little anxious. He originally thought that he chose to enter the city just because he didn't want to hide his head and leave after a night's rest, but the other party had the intention of staying. You know, a lot of people are eyeing us now, and if we stay here, it's definitely not good for us. Logan became emotional, and scenes from his past experience in New York flew by in front of his eyes. New York City deserves a place for us. He used to think the same, but unfortunately it is different now. However, Endless did not speak, just smiled silently and looked to the end of the road. An extended Lincoln came slowly, and when it finally stopped in front of everyone, a waiter got out of the car and respectfully opened the door of the back seat. How does this car look like it's greeting us? Logan frowned and looked at the extravagant luxury car in front of him, and cast his gaze on the Wonder siblings who came with them in surprise. After all, he was sure that no one else in the group would be greeted except for these two, of whom were of unknown origin. As a result, just before Logan's thoughts fell, Endless had already stepped into the car, and at the same time turned back to Raw and several others to follow. Let's go, this place is not familiar with life, don't waste too much time, it's easy to get into trouble. Endless spoke, motioning for the Wonder siblings to come with them. This is your car. Where did it come from? Logan Hawlett looked at this scene a little confused. The car came for Endless, and things were completely unexpected for him. Logan, you're old, don't you allow a young man to do things you can't do. Charles, who was in a wheelchair next to him, laughed and teased. As soon as he finished speaking, the professor was carried into the car by Laura with a chair. Although she is young, she has a powerful variant ability, and it is not difficult to lift a thin old man in his 90s. As for the car in front of her, Laura was not surprised. She knew what happened when Endless went out last night. Wanda, it's time for us to go. Just as Wanda was about to get into the car, she was pulled by Pete and shook her head repeatedly. After the latter saw the scene of Endless' murder yesterday, he had a deep fear in his heart, and he was awakened by nightmares more than once when he slept last night. Pete really didn't dare to get along with Endless anymore. Instigated. Wanda glanced at her brother extremely speechlessly, and strode into the car without looking back. You. Seeing this, Pete was anxious to die, looking at Endless, who was smiling at him, gritting his teeth or choosing to keep up with his sister. Endless, I need an explanation. Logan Howlett, who stood at the end, had many questions in his heart, but he chose to get on the bus at this point. After Endless watched Logan get into the car, he did not answer his question directly, but asked the driver, how did Kim arrange it? Mr. Endless, the boss has already arranged accommodation for you, so I'll send you over first. The driver said slowly in a respectful and humble tone. Good. Endless nodded, and the vehicle began to drive slowly. You actually got in touch with Kim. Listening to a few simple sentences of dialogue, Logan's experience naturally easily figured out the cause and effect of the matter. He looked at Endless in shock. I never expected that this young mutant would be able to get the Underground Emperor of New York, Jinhee, overnight. Endless smiled softly and pointed to his head, it's thanks to Charles' help. Endless, you are really the strongest mutant I have ever seen. Charles suddenly laughed and said with emotion, even if you copy ability, it is usually impossible to reach your current level. After a pause, he continued, you have now reached the 5th level of mutant. Endless nodded silently after hearing the other party's words. He has evaluated his current ability and control, which is almost the level of a 5-level mutant. Definitely is not considered Omega class. Because all Omega-level mutants must have the ability to control the molecular structure on the basis of the 5th level. And the potential must have endless possibilities. Both are indispensable. Endless, who has the ability to copy, is not worried about the latter condition. He only needs to strengthen his control over ability, and it is only a matter of time to achieve the Omega level. Endless, level 5 mutant. Logan was shocked when he heard Charles give such a high opinion of Endless. But when he thought about it again, he seemed to feel normal again. After all, the ability shown by Endless before was too perverted, and he was only 18 years old. This means that he has unlimited possibilities in the future. At this point in his thoughts, Logan's face looked quite complicated when he looked at Endless again. He remembered what the latter had said while holding the steering wheel before entering New York. After Endless and his party left in a car. They had just left in the lobby of the hotel. Step out of a mature and sexy figure. She wore a short red close-fitting skirt with a thrilling undulation, a pair of slender, round, straight thighs wrapped in black silk, and a pair of high heels with black and red soles on her feet. It was the Black Widow sent to investigate Endless, Natasha Romanov. Mission objective: left the hotel. She looked at the elongated Lincoln that disappeared at the end of the road, and her long white fingers pressed the Bluetooth headset in her ear and gently spoke. Keep up with the mission. The person across the headset said. Yes. Natasha Romanov hung up, stepped on her high heels and walked to the hotel, stopped a taxi and followed. That's it guys, hope you like this video. Like, share and subscribe the channel if you want more videos like this. Also tell me in the comment section down below if you have any recommendation about what I should make next. Thanks for watching.